Okay, so I'm back here at day two after having round two of the vaccine. Still feeling very well. Actually, no symptoms at all. Reason why I came back is I got a very good question from a viewer that was definitely worthy of discussing. So she says one thing that I seem to be noticing is that people who have already had COVID seem to be reacting more strongly to the vaccine. For instance, a friend of mine that had COVID in August just got his second dose yesterday and said overnight his symptoms were more intense than what he had actually than the actual infection. Yikes! I know that this is only one case, but I've had a chance to do a very limited amount of reading regarding the concept of antibody-dependent enhancement of infection, and it sounds as though this may have been demonstrated with other coronaviruses, such as the SARS and the MERS in vitro. Also, I know there have been rare reports of people who had been reinfected with COVID and got sicker the second time. Given this, should we be concerned that these instances could mean that theoretically, if one were to catch COVID sometime later after the vaccine, it may enhance the infection and lead to a worse case of COVID? So, excellent question and definitely worthy of discussion. So, what I'd like to do is first kind of talk about the broad aspect of the recommendations regarding getting the COVID virus and actually getting the vaccination or having exposure to that. So the CDC basically states that if you've had the COVID infection or if you have the active infection, to certainly delay the acquisition of the vaccination. So that would mean doing the usual waiting for the treatment and waiting to come out of isolation if need be. So that's about a 7 to 10 days after you start to get the symptoms, and then about 2 to 3 days when the symptoms have resolved. So the recommendation is to not get the vaccination at that point, probably because, well, you just don't have a lot of evidence regarding what kind of dangers that might put you in. Now, if you've after you've finished with the infection, there is a possibility of having a reinfection. So they do make the recommendation, of course, to get the COVID vaccination. And they actually don't give a minimum amount of time after having recovered from it to getting it. However, they do say that the likelihood of getting a reinfection is really, really very small 90 days after you've had the infection. The CDC says 90 days. World Health Organization, I believe, says actually 6 months. So because of that, it could be prudent to wait the 90 days after you've recovered from the infection, as the likelihood of reinfection is rare. The waiting is actually not because I don't think it puts you in any danger to have the vaccination. You could probably get it at any time. It's more that it's unlikely that the vaccination is going to have a lot of protective ability for you because the likelihood of reinfection is really low. So if you are worried about some of these immunologic phenomena that may occur, I think it is probably prudent to wait because we just really don't know. We don't know what kind of effects that would be, but more than likely you're good for that 90 days. Although, again, the CDC doesn't really give a minimum amount of time to actually get the vaccine. So you could get it, but it could also be prudent to wait that out. Now, if you're a person under investigation, which means if you've had exposure to COVID-19 within 6 feet without masks for 15 minutes, then in those cases, it is recommended to finish your entire isolation before getting the vaccination, so waiting the 14 days. And I don't think that that's because there's any particular risk of getting the vaccination, but it's more to protect other people from getting exposed to you who may have had exposure to the vaccine, to the virus rather. So people who are dispensing the vaccine, people who are getting the vaccine, they don't want to put them at risk for that if you've actually had exposure. So if you've had exposure, wait the 14 days, not so much because it's a huge risk to you, but you could be putting other people at risk as well. But then again, if you did have the COVID infection and got the vaccine, then you could have a more rough go of it. So all things considered, it's best to wait. Now, in terms of the risk of getting a more severe infection after having had the vaccination, that's another good question, and we can go with the research, the studies that actually looked at the efficacy of this. Now, no vaccination is 100% efficacious. 95% is actually pretty good, but for every 100 people who get the vaccination, 5 people are going to manifest the symptoms of the condition as well. And it appears to those people who got the symptoms after having the vaccination, they didn't have a particularly more rough time of it of anybody who had the actual infection. And those that got the vaccination, of course, 95% of them didn't show any symptoms at all. So I think from the efficacy standpoint that there's good evidence that even if you get the infection after having got the vaccination, more than likely your less likely to show any symptoms of the infection. And if you're among the 5% that did have the symptoms, it's more or less just the normal course of the events with the virus, which ain't great, but I don't think it's there's much evidence that it's going to be much worse. Now, in terms of the immunogenic capacities that you were talking about, well, those are very good questions, and we just don't know. So that's why we're rolling this out step by step. We're doing this in different stages. So I like to be among those that can sort of describe what's going on and describe how I'm feeling. I'm really exposed every day in with a proper PPE, but still there is that exposure. So I'll let you know if I have any of those symptoms. But right now it appears that even if you do get the infection after having vaccinations, you're 95% less likely to manifest any symptoms, and to those that did manifest it, didn't really have much of a rough go of it. If there's any concern about exposure, wait it out. If you've had the condition, then it might be prudent to wait the 90 days. CDC doesn't specifically say you need to do that, but I think it certainly could be worthwhile doing if you're concerned with that. So anyway, keep the questions coming. I'll keep coming back on as I get them. I think that was an excellent point of discussion. So again, I'll keep you posted.